Hello, and welcome to the Steve and Mark Discuss podcast, where Steve has looked through the media. He may find some quite serious subjects to discuss, or some even less serious. So I do not know what he's going to bring up. So he will do a few minutes talking, and I will react to what he says, and then he may interject with any other comments he has about my thoughts about things. Okay, so over to you, Steve.
Hi, people. So, most of the news circulating at the moment is about Israel. So, in this podcast, I'm not going to touch on that because everybody else is. It's going to be a little bit like an opinion piece, although it's based around headlines. So we know that what's fashionable at the moment with the minorities, the black minorities, I speak, is reparations for slavery. And they are complaining to the government that they need to get reparations because their ancestors 3 or 4 or 5 generations ago were slaves. Now, in principle, I'm in favour of that. Just put my cards on the table, and I'll explain for why. I'm in favour of reparations. However, I'm not in favour of governmental reparations. If you want compensation from anybody, it needs to be from the ancestors of those who were slave owners. If any of these slave owners were companies, for example, a sugar company, I know of one in the US that admitted and apologized that it was a slave owner. They should be made to pay, if anybody, made to pay reparations for the slaves who were on their plantation. So I was looking, at this, and there are people who have either for mode, just for fashion, gave their apologies to families of slaves all those many years ago, and it might be that they were just to appear. We have this culture where everybody needs to want to appear.
Virtual signaling, yes.
There you are.
Yeah.
So I think these claims for reparations need to go through a legal justice system, right? You can't do it any other way. It needs to be done against the law. Now, there's a problem for the families of slaves in the US because of the statute of limitations.
Mm.
It's more than 3 or 4 years ago, so you can't really complain about something 300 years later, 200 or 300 years later. However, if you wanted to make a stab at it, you can do. There is a list of slave owners who used to be slave owners on the internet, and I'll give you the address. Let me just change my eyes. en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/slavery.
Okay.
That will give you a list of American slave owners. In the UK, it's a little bit different because we don't have the statute of limitations. They don't exist in the UK.
Yeah.
So if you were a naughty boy 100 years ago, and the police found out, you know, you still get your prison sentence if you
Yeah.
if you're old enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, right. And I got I read an article in the Telegraph,
Yes. Yes.
Daily Telegraph, of a family, a British family called the Trevelyan family, and this was from February of this year.
Yeah.
They apologized
Mm.
for they admitted that their family, I think it was their great grandfathers, had slaves, and they her great grandfather, when they abolished slavery in the UK, he was given reparations. The slave owner
Mm.
was given compensation, and
Yeah.
his family, he received £26,898
Mm.
compensation from the UK government,
Yeah.
because of course he would have lost. He had
Yeah.
Their slaves were in Guyana, just so that
Yeah.
they weren't on English British
No,
soil.
no, not
They
so
were,
late.
they were in Guyana. I think it
Yeah.
was sugar. I think it was
Yes.
sugar that they were, and that was back in 1835.
Mm.
1835, so a little over, you know, almost 200 years ago. Um, and the lady who threw herself into the limelight, into the press, and said, we're sorry," she set up a fund of £100,000
Mm.
to be spent in Guyana to help the natives, if you
Right.
like. Now then, to me, that was that was a bit of an insult, because it wasn't the slaves that were. Oh, and I forgot to say, after they abolished slavery,
Mm.
the slave owners kept the slaves and put them onto an apprenticeship,
Yeah. Later.
which is not a slave, but it was a slave, because they were supposed to be, you know,
Yeah.
learning something when they were
Yeah.
when they were.
I got that.
So anyway, this sum of £100,000 is very light, because if the only sum of money that we are given in this story
Mm.
is the £26,878 given to her great
Mm.
grandfather,
Mm.
and he was the owner. He wasn't the slave. He was the owner.
Yeah. Yes.
But if that is anything to go by these days, today, uh, just for inflation,
Yeah.
it would have been £2,823,507.96. So basically, her great grandfather
Yeah.
would have made himself a millionaire, relatively speaking, for
Right.
not having use anymore. It's a lot of money,
Yeah. Yeah. And I know about this. Yes. Yes.
and this is even without the compensation
Mm.
given to the slaves in themselves. This is if you like, unreceived salary, and we can go into workers' rights and all this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I
how much
understand.
would they have
Yeah.
earned and all this. And I just think that, um, if the slaves, if the uh, forefathers of the slaves wish to sue anybody
Mm.
Feel free, but go after the slave owners and not everybody. Like for example, my family,
Yeah.
they didn't own any slaves.
Oh,
We,
oh,
we, were,
oh, yeah.
we, were a, we were a very poor family.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a shirt maker on my mum's side.
Yeah.
He's Irish. And on my father's side, I don't even know who he was because all my grandparents had died before I was born.
Well, yeah.
But going back, I mean, they were all from humble beginnings.
Well, I think
Because
yeah.
I can prove that because I live in a flat in
Yeah.
Piedade in Brazil. I don't have a massive house somewhere
No.
on some, so
Yeah.
so yeah. So if you're gonna go out, if you're gonna go against anybody, go against somebody where you can prove that your ancestor was a slave, and you can prove that X person X was the the slave owner, and you
Okay.
go after that family, and it's easier if it was a company.
Mm.
For example, the Great Western in the US
Mm.
used an awful lot of slaves
Mm.
to get the tracks laid.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So if you can prove that, it's easy because the Great Western still exists,
right.
and you go after the juridical person and not the
Yeah.
physical person.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
Well,
there you go. Took
I
it
found
down.
what you said is quite interesting. I understand your reasoning. I mean, yeah, I mean this thing about reparations. Yes, it's interesting that companies were compensated by the British government after slavery ended. Remember, slavery was a legal business. Yeah. Okay, we can do hop horror. This is always the problem with history and in context. At the time, it wasn't until obviously social consciousness started to come in and Wilberforce, etc. Yeah, that things started to change. Um, it is, yeah, the companies were compensated, and I think it's only a few years ago the British government actually completed paying off the companies involved. If you can check that, Steve, I remember reading it. Maybe it is now this thing about compensation. You also have to look at a lot more than just okay, somebody's ancestor in the US was a slave. There's actually a okay, it's easy to pick up individual examples of where it is. Tim Scott, for example, is a senator in the US. He jokes that his family have gone from picking cotton to the Senate, yeah, in 2 generations, yeah. Um, he's a made man. He's managed to, okay, his family have managed to build up. I'm not saying this is wonderful. He's probably might be an exception to the rule. I think, yeah, you have to look at individual circumstances. Not all slave
Yes.
owners were particularly bad. There were some that did have a conscience. Yeah, they were seen as amenities, but some slave owners were actually quite inverted commas, and don't shoot me down, reasonable towards their slaves. Now, my own personal experience of this, my wife in Brazil, and I'm using Brazil as an example here, is actually descended from slaves. So I'm waiting for her check to come from the Portuguese government or a Portuguese company any day now, because it's been raised. I think we have to be very, very careful, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. So anything I say, I might not necessarily agree with, but I'm just obviously readdressing the balance as you would do with Steve. If we start looking at historical things that have gone wrong historically, we all know now that slavery was bad. Yeah, it's not in living memory. Okay, we as a society in the Western world, we have grown. We no longer think it's right to keep anyone as slaves legally. I'm going to use the term legally here. Yeah, remembering at that time it was legal to own slaves. Yeah, disregards the conditions. What was acceptable conditions? There were rules in place about accommodation on ships and everything, which is maybe that's where the cases could be. If you could prove your ancestors were very badly treated, maybe that's the thing. Remembering that legally slavery was in place as a legal trade. Then we can start looking at it. The city of Liverpool was built on the proceeds of slavery. Okay, they have a museum there to slavery, and fair play, it's a very good museum. I've seen parts of it. They have the slave walk once a year in Liverpool in commemoration, so it's not hidden. There's a lot of there were no real slaves. There weren't many slaves in the UK, as you pointed out, at the time. There were a few that came through and became actually had quite a good life. Okay, servitude. Remembering that a majority of the British population, as you touched upon, did not have much income, were not wealthy. The joke is, didn't need to bring slaves to the UK because we already had the indigenous population that acted as much. Most people were above, probably below what we consider the poverty line now. And your and my families are probably included. My families were farm workers. Yeah.
I think like this family that I mentioned,
Yeah.
you know, their troop of slaves was in Guyana.
Yeah.
You know, and there are a lot of slavery going on in Jamaica as well.
Yeah.
There. You know, they were owned by magnates.
Of course they were. Yeah. Yeah, from here, for British-owned companies. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, we can start arguing now. The point I'm making is, historically, it was still a legal thing.
No,
Where would the compensation? Yeah, where was it? Yeah, and I mean, I'm not defending slavery, and there's probably more slaves now in the world than there ever was when it was a legal thing. So we can start arguing all sorts of things. Yeah, and how far back do you go? Most. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, my point is this: that if you want to look for reparations, do it.
Yeah.
And let the law courts sort it out.
Well,
but don't try and use the government money.
Yeah.
To do it, because it wasn't the government. There were people in the government. I know that Roosevelt it was.
Yeah.
He had a few.
Yeah.
However, but that's him as a person, and it should be his family lineage that is approached, and not the US government.
Okay, I'm gonna say something legally. If my grandfather murdered your grandfather, for example, does that make me culpable? The suffering that your family might have had since, does that make me culpable? I know we're talking companies.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
However, it depends where we are.
Yeah.
If it's happened in the UK, and I could prove that your grandfather murdered my grandfather, I might be able to get something out of you because of the family lineage.
Yeah, but I'm not responsible for what my ancestors
No, I know.
did. I know we're talking companies a little bit different. Yeah, but
this is where we're getting to, you know, because I'm not responsible of what my sons do now that they're over 18. However, if they do something naughty, sometimes Daddy has to pay for it.
Well, Daddy, you never stop being a parent. My parents, my parents would tell me. But yeah, I mean, yes, but I'm looking now. The other thing I'm looking at, the Jews. Okay, I'll stay away from this, but the Jews suffered abhorrent things as well, and others during World War II. Does that mean that the companies that made the gas chambers, they're independent companies, and they're still in existence? Certain, and I'm not going to start naming them because I'm scared of these companies coming after me. Certain companies, German and Italian companies, produced equipment to enable acts of barbarity, who still exist today. I think it's a bit of a dangerous thing to go down. Now, I'm not saying I'm supporting everything that happens in history, of course not. And we took British empires, the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire. Again, if we start doing this, yes, if you can prove that maybe the conditions that endured then had knock-on effects, maybe. I also think it's interesting that there's a newspaper, and you said you read the Telegraph. I believe it's the Guardian newspaper in the UK that has been advocating for compensation. Yeah, if you actually look at the original owners of the Guardian, I believe, and I hope I'm not speaking out of trace, and I'm willing to retract it if I'm wrong. We're actually owned, yes. So if we're going to go down this route, we're going to have to look at everyone and anyone that's sort of shouting. And also in the US, it was and yeah, if we're going to be, I know we're trying to stay away from politics, but we have to remember that companies are still enabled by political decisions. Okay. If we look at the history of the US, people think the Republican Party is this public, business and everything else. The Republican Party was the party that fought against slavery, in effect, the North. Okay. And as much as I have romanticism about the Deep South and different other things, yeah, the American Civil War was primarily fought about the what did they call it? The unique, the peculiar institution was the actual term. They never used slavery, the peculiar institution, which given that, it was all a business model at the time as well. That was actually more pushed by the Democrat, well, certainly the Democrat Party.